Well, the rumours were true. Lewis Hamilton is no longer a Mercedes driver. Well, I mean, if you want to be particular about it, he's got one more season, but hey, it sounds more dramatic this way. Lewis Hamilton will be becoming a Ferrari driver for a multi-year deal come 2025. And according to the various little micro rumours that went about, Toto Wolff only found out about this going down yesterday. Oh, gut punch in the extreme! And that Charles Leclerc was aware of this deal when he signed his multi-year contract for several more seasons. So that means that Charles Leclerc, he likes pain, doesn't he? And that maybe he was aware about what was going to happen, that it'd be a nice little challenge for him to have, and he has talked about the idea of Lewis being his teammate. And what actually makes me think is that I think he was asked about this in Vegas, and he was kind of glowing about Lewis, but maybe he had a feeling about what was going down and why there was a sticking point regarding Carlos's contract, that there was going to be no contract, that Carlos's future was in his hands. And a statement from his own camp has said, news about his future will be arriving in due course. So once we find out what's going to be happening with Carlos, we will have a better understanding as to where everything else will go in terms of the Formula One silly season. Now that it's a real thing, oh my goodness, this silly season, I was really having a bad feeling that this was all going to be completely deflating. Lando signs a multi-year deal, Charles signs a multi-year deal, and now Lewis signs a multi-year deal, but for a completely different team, whilst also having a contract extension back in the summer, which turns out to have been a Hulkenberg, a 1+1 sort of a deal, with Lewis activating that release clause for 2025. So the only happy bunny out of all of this right now, as I said in my initial breakdown video, is George Russell. He is going to be extremely happy that the dream that he was sold is now going to come true, instead of it being an absolute nightmare that he was going to have to wait out the clock, and then Kimi Antonelli would have come into Formula One and then taken away the dream from him, much like how, in a way, George Russell took the dream away from Pascal Wehrlein back in 2017, when things ran out the clock. Oh dearie me, but now that that's out in the open, and that Lewis is looking forward to a brand new challenge, and obviously has made Mercedes completely and utterly destabilized since they have now lost their big superstar driver, and now landfills across the world are going to be filled with Mercedes Team LH merchandise, who could actually replace him? If you want to have George on side with you and lead the team, because it's quite clear that George has been waiting for this dream, he's like, at last, my dream can become a reality. Crikey, this is going to be really good. Come on, chaps. Come on, chaps. We can do this really good. Come on. And of course, doing some very dramatic head turns. So naturally, you're going to want to have a driver that is going to be on his side. And most people tend to be talking about the likes of Alex Albon going to partner up with George Russell, since they do have a good track record and a really good friendship. But the question is, though, is that you are going to then have some kind of power dynamic that we have kind of seen with George and Alex, because this is meant to be George's team. Alex comes from a team where he gets to be the leader of Williams. Yes, Williams is a relatively low midfielder, and he's going to a higher midfielder currently, could be a front runner in a couple of years' time. And this is a really good opportunity to drive for a legacy big team at nearly the age of 30. So this is quite a good moment for Albon in his prime. But I do get the feeling that James is not going to take this lying down, and he will respond with a bumper contract with a really good pay bonus, and that Alex can then still be the part of what he's been able to forge at Williams and ultimately provide something that will be really good in his legacy. Yes, I know it could be a little bit narcissistic that Alex is mainly thinking about himself and his image, but it does make some kind of sense to have him at Mercedes. But for me, I don't personally think that that's the kind of thing that Mercedes and Toto want. What I think Toto Wolff wants right now, after this huge sea change, and now feeling like how Martin Whitmarsh and Ron Dennis felt when Lewis left McLaren, when everyone thought he was going to stay there forever, and not long ago Lewis said that he was going to spend the rest of his career at Mercedes. Toto has now had that happen to him, so he needs right now a stable pair of hands that is not going to rock the boat. And I do get the feeling that my next option might not do that. It might make things worse. Esteban Ocon, perhaps? Well, okay, I can understand why, because having Esteban there is a realization about what could have happened. And technically he was the reserve driver back in 2019 before he then got that deal with Renault and then Alpine. But the thing about that is, though, is that Esteban, sure, He has got the skill, and he has the ability. But the question is though, would he be a team player? Right now, I don't think so. And George right now would not need the kind of driver that is going to be going all guns blazing and wanting to make the best opportunity of driving for a team that has multiple constructors and multiple drivers' championships and has been hosting one of the greatest drivers of all time. He's going to now wanting to be proving everybody wrong that he deserves to be there for the long term and realize one of his dreams and one of the goals that he had as a Mercedes junior driver. And George is right there, who Toto and Mercedes have been pegging as their own starlet. You got two starlets right here battling it out. All that's going to cause right now is a supernova. That is not going to cause harmony, Toto. That's just going to cause utter chaos. And again, I'm not really the best fan when it comes to Esteban, but I don't think that Mercedes is the right place for him. Okay, well, why don't you bring in Kimi Antonelli? No, that boy has had enough hype circling around him, and I will direct you to this video here as to the reasons why he needs to be left alone and get on with his learning in Formula 2. I'm appreciating that Gabby Bortoleto has practically been forgotten by the media, even though he is the protege of Fernando Alonso. Nobody's batting an eyelid with Bortoleto, and he's the guy who won the F3 championship last year. So, yeah, just there are plenty of big stars in F2, not just Kimi Antonelli. There's Ollie Behrman to consider, and he's a teammate. That's going to be fiery. Ferrari reserve versus Mercedes reserve. Then, frantically, I saw that thing from Karun Chandok that apparently Bottas would be brought back to Mercedes. So essentially, it would be just like, "Hi, Valtteri, it's Toto. It's time for you to come back to your home. Please. Please. Yes, all right, you can wear the buttless chaps." The idea of having Valtteri back there as a safe pair of hands as some kind of stopgap is a tantalizing prospect, and it would be some way of Toto repaying all of the years as a wingman to Lewis to then suddenly call him back as a potential safe pair of hands for a couple of years before Kimi Antonelli comes in. Valtteri could then feel vindicated that he was valued by them after all, but only if he gets a 2-year contract. If it's going to be one of those piecemeal 1-year jobbies that happen every year, I think he will just tell Toto to go and swivel. But then again, we've got the likes of him driving for Filet Mignon F1 team, and probably not being on Audi's radar as they take majority control of that team. And now that Carlos Sainz is available on the market, I don't see Valtteri there because he does not come with a lot of money. I think he might be a very nice holding pattern before Antonelli comes in a couple of years' time after he's done his time with Williams. But I do feel like Valtteri is one of my favourite choices. And then people are saying, well, why doesn't Carlos Sainz go over as some kind of swappy jobby? Well, maybe. Carlos might like the idea of driving for Mercedes, but I think it would be a case of going from the frying pan into an identical frying pan. You go from being the second to Charles Leclerc to being the second of George. And of course, George is probably not quite as talented as Charles Leclerc, but he is still making that his team. And George is going to be just blustering and be like, oh, Toto, you said it was my team. What's Carlos doing here? He's a disruptor. Climbing. If George had a monocle, it would have fallen off by now. I think Carlos has had enough of being the guy who's being railroaded out despite banging his head against the wall, trying to convince Ferrari he should be their team leader. He's not going to get that. Charles Leclerc's now probably not going to get that because now he's got a 7-time world champion coming in and he's sort of just taken it. He's not resisted it. But I know what you're going to be thinking, and I know that you're going to be groaning, but I still think the best person who can then go and partner George is Mick Schumacher. Yeah, I said it. I know you are going to be groaning that Mick Schumacher will just crash the car, but let's be realistic here. Let's go back to 2016, when Nico Rosberg announced surprisingly and shockingly to everyone that he was going to retire from Formula 1 and leave Mercedes, much like how Lewis is doing for 2025. What Toto needed at that time was a safe pair of hands within his inner ranks that was not going to be rocking the boat and would work well with Lewis Hamilton. Who worked well? Valtteri Bottas. And if we're not going to be having Bottas, then I feel like Mick Schumacher could be the person that will do the job. Because Mick, he is aware of what the team needs from him and what is to be expected. He is not the kind of person who is going to rock the boat cause any problems. He has worked with the likes of George and Lewis for the better part of a season in the background, and he has been contributing quite a lot in the simulator. And now he's going to be having a year in the World Endurance Championship, which is gaining furious momentum with a works team that has been showing real promise in testing. This could be some serious learning and education, and in the world of sports cars as well, which is where his father Michael cut his teeth back in the late 80s and early 90s. This is something that could be really good in terms of educating himself at the higher end of a modern type of sports car. Yes, it's not Formula One, but WEC these days, the hypercars, they are pretty close. George will probably be quite happy with the likes of Mick Schumacher because he's the kind of person that's going to play well with the team. He wants to show what he can do, and he's probably aware that he's not going to be the number one. George is, and George will be there as long as he needs to be. We'll probably get a contract extension by the end of next year for George. He can now commit knowing that he's going to be at that team and be the leader for the foreseeable future until he decides that he wants to go and do something else, much like how Lewis is doing right now. How are you going to get Toto to bring Mick in full-time for his own team? Well, there is a certain little German bird by the name of Sebastian Vettel knocking around. And people were actually pointing this out, and I got a couple of messages pointing me towards an image of George and Seb skiing together and looking very happy. And then formulating some theories that maybe Sebastian might come back to fill in the gap himself, become a driver for Mercedes, something he wanted to do. Once again, something he could emulate from one of his mentors, Michael Schumacher. He can then do what Michael did and help formulate and bring some advice. Much like how, in a way, Sebastian provided some good championship insight and intelligence and information for Aston Martin. And look where they suddenly just rocketed up from the bottom of the midfield to the top of the midfield, and at one point, second in the constructors. The information that Seb provided some really good intel for them to go on forward and evolve with Fernando. And I'm not even going to get into the thing about Fernando and Mercedes, because that's just not going to make sense at all. But in any case, I feel like if Sebastian Vettel doesn't come back as a driver himself, he will come back as some form of consultant, and then be the voice in Toto's ear saying, hey, give my kid a shot. And a four-time world champion telling you, you should hire that guy. I think Sebastian could easily become the next Nicky for Toto. And that kind of guidance from a really decorated world champion and respected figure in the world of Formula One, that's something Toto would take heed with. And I think he might take it. So I do personally think that Mick Schumacher is my pick. And I know that I've already made prior predictions saying that Mick would go to Alpine. That could still happen as well. But I do think this is an opportunity for Mick to come back, and with a team that recognises what he can bring to it. But going back to Seb for a second, I could easily see him one day replacing Stefano, who has clearly become the next incarnation of Bernie Ecclestone, and become the king of Formula One himself. If you'd like to find out why I think this, go and watch this video next. All hail King Seb!